You good to go? Let's go. Asha, thank you so much again for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
I wanted to ask you the last two episodes that we were speaking about. The first episode being love, the second episode being mental health. Now, this has been there in my mind for some time, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to ask you. I wanted to speak more about teenagers. They're looking for love. They're very conscious about how they look, body image, the stress that they go through school, the struggles that they have in defining themselves. They want to know who they are. Are they children? Are they adults? And if they are who they want to be, is it realistic? So talk to me about teenagers.
Thank you for asking me to talk about teenagers because I have two teenagers myself.
Wow.
So certainly a learning experience. I think when it comes to parenting, when we talk about teenagers, it doesn't start there. It actually starts much earlier. All that you are kind of speaking about in terms of how they feel about themselves, the anxiety, the pressure. What you see in a teenager, if you let us take a step back. If a 5-year-old is rolling their eyes, if that is not addressed at that point in time, add 10 years to that, at 15 years of age, they're still going to be rolling their eyes. So it really goes back to, the foundation of parenting from little and how it actually evolves over time when they get to adolescence, because adolescents or teenagers, of course, we all know it's a time where they're really trying to define themselves, their identity in terms of their body, in terms of their personality, trying to fit in, trying to form relationships, of course, seeking for love, feeling that sense of being loved. I think that the one important thing when it comes to raising teenagers is to ask your child, do you feel loved? Really, really feel loved, because we sometimes think about loving our kids in what we are doing and providing for them. And so often I can hear kids say to me, teenagers, that their parents do the world for them, put them into great schools, they do all the extra activities, they have the friends, but they don't have that experience, that deep, deep fulfillment in themselves where they feel loved and acknowledged. They just feel that pressure to achieve and to please their parents. Because so often what can happen with parenting is that we are parenting our children and wanting our kids to meet certain achievements that we would have probably liked in ourselves at an earlier stage. So we are reparenting ourselves when we are parenting children. It's really a process where we're learning a lot about ourselves. It's a tough, challenging time. The power of conversation is so important in this stage, is to make the time to connect and to speak and engage in conversation. Have lots and lots of conversation, whether it's when you're cooking together. Meal times are often wonderful, wonderful times to connect. Try not to deal with a crisis in the crisis mode, but when you are finding that your teenager is relaxed and happy, try and engage in a conversation about something that maybe you are worried about, but in a very light-hearted, playful manner. I think that so many adults are quite grumpy, they take life so seriously, and sometimes we just need to drop into our childlike state and connect with them and be a bit light-hearted in connecting and have conversations, talk about different topics, obviously age appropriately, but just opening that kind of topic, whether it's about bullying or whether it's about sexual identity or whether it's about friendships or relationships or love. So often we are in crisis mode, managing crisis all the time. And we need to step out of crisis management in terms of our children in our lives and rather go into a space where we can have more conversation to prevent moments of crisis. And so often we can do that by connecting with our kids at times where we are all happy and engaging. So we do require more time, and it requires a certain discipline in the way we are raising our kids, teenagers or even smaller kids. It requires like a discipline and that consistency. They want to feel that there's a predictability, there's a sense of safety, the way you're relating to them. And of course, you know, there's an old saying, if your children are not going to share the small things with you, they're not going to share the big things. So listen to both the small and the big things. You know, the simple question, whatever their curious mind is asking, take the time to actually answer that, because that's a connection. And speak to them about all these challenges. I think so many parents don't want to show kids their weakness or their vulnerability. So they, of course, ideally we would love to raise our kids free of any pain or suffering. I often say to my kids, my two teenagers, if there's one thing I wish for you is that when you are experiencing a moment of struggle or pain or suffering, you need to have the skills to manage that. It's, again, that self-management. And I think we need more conversation about those kind of topics with our families. So I love meal times in my home. It's the meal times that really I get to engage with my children.
So you do speak to your teenagers meal times, you said. And also you mentioned that it is a challenging, a learning experience. So when you say it's a learning experience, what do you mean by that, Asha?
So, like I say, you know, we have kids, and in that process, it's almost like we have a child. We have a child to view our child, and that becomes reflection of us. So we can do a lot of our own self-healing and self-growth in the way we parent. But if you are a parent that's already pressurizing your own self, and you are, you know, you're stressed and you're overwhelmed and you're anxious, that's going to limit that connection. So that is why it always goes back to that relationship with yourself and trying to learn and grow as much as an individual. And that, remember, your adolescents, not only in adolescence or in teenager, they have been observing you from a very young age. They take in everything that you say and do, and they watch with such curiosity. And that is the way they relate to you is reflection back. Look and observe carefully how they relate to you, because they tell you everything. But the power of kids having the space to be completely honest with their parents and speak to them, I think it's becoming less and less in our busy lifestyles. Unfortunately, technology plays a very important role. Technology is not all bad. There's lots of good. And technology is not the problem. It's the human being using the technology. And so often I hear parents say to me, oh, my teenagers, they are always on their phones and they don't connect. But I often ask parents, oh, what is your relationship with technology? How are you relating to it? What are your children observing? Because we're quick to want to implement a behavior or something in our children, but we need to look at ourselves and say, what is it that we are doing, because our kids are watching us. But right now there's technology that really does play a role, where kids are basically on their phones, whether it's supper time, whether it's they're multitasking, even when they're doing homework, or they've got several apps open on their computer, on their device, and you can only imagine what overload that is that happens in our brains. So, the power of conversation is critical. And, of course, being lighthearted and being spontaneous. There's a child within each one of us as adults. And we need to be a bit light and be playful, but laugh more with our children. As I say, we take life so seriously. We're also stressed and anxious and, driven by achievement. But the way we view our kids, we need to be very careful how we label them. I have 2 children and they're chalk and cheese. And, if one is organized and one is a bit messy or untidy, who is it? how can I go into their rooms and say, but you are lazy because your room is untidy, and you are organized because your room is neat and tidy. I need to allow them to experience a sense of freedom in developing their individuality. But so often we labels become quite. We get attached to them. We have memory of it.
It scars us, doesn't it?
It does. It's the wounds that embody us and memories, and it keeps coming up, and it links into those traumas that I spoke about. In a moment, a child can feel rejected in the busyness of a parent on their phone, and imagine a child that really needs to connect, and they see their mom or dad busy on their phone or distracted or tired or exhausted that they can't even connect. They could experience that as a moment of rejection, which can lead to a feeling of isolation. So just grasp those moments. And it's not about the quantity of time. It's the quality. If you can give your teenager even 10 minutes of good quality attention, again, attention, that deep listening from the mind, from the heart, from the soul, your child is going to open up and relate and feel more safe and secure to connect with you.
Brings me back to the conversations that we had in the previous 2 episodes. So one, I would say, what I get from here is self-management as a parent, but I also would want to bring in self-centeredness in order to, because sometimes parents are busy. Not all parents, and I'm going to say not all parents ignore their children.
Yes.
And this, like you said, I'm glad you mentioned that quality is more important than the quantity, because that would make an impact. So quality time with the children is essential. But what or how does one manage, especially the teenager or the child, who does not get any of that from the parent?
How does the parent manage? How does the child?
How does the child manage? Because it's a shame that the child has to go through what the child has to go through. But how does one encourage themselves, and how do they get over this?
Yeah, in that way, I think it would be important for that child to be able to connect, if not with a parent or a caregiver, anyone that they feel connected to, whether it's a sibling or a family member or even a teacher at school. To encourage that child to connect and speak to that person. It's again, if there's open communication, that child will feel comfortable to speak. But in a situation where there's no connection between a child and a parent, that child's gonna really just go into reclusive mode and cut off and shut down, and probably look for other sources of love and attention. And we could find that these kids find themselves in situations that are not favorable and that do not lend to their process of learning and growth, and can become challenging for parents. So sometimes I ask my parents, how much time can you allocate each day for this relationship? I've had parents sometimes say to me 10, 15 minutes in a day. That's okay. But just make a commitment. Invest in that process. Remember that we are raising the future of our world. We need to take this seriously. This is our future. We play such an important role as parents in our creation of the future of our world. And these are our kids. So, of course, we're not perfect. We all make mistakes. I certainly make many mistakes. But it's about pausing and reflecting back on that, and acknowledging and creating and recreating ourselves all the time. Speaking to other parents, parent groups are always so important, because we're not alone. I think so often parents feel so alone because they feel that they may be judged in how they bring up their kids. But remember, like the famous saying goes, there's no book for parenting. So we are all learning every moment, every day. I often say to my kids, you think I know what I'm doing? I don't know. I'm learning as the days go by. about parenting. And of course, we have different systems. Sometimes we have single parents. That plays a different role. And, the relationship with one parent will be very different from another parent. And also developmental stages. Sometimes you'll find one parent closer to the child when they are maybe in the early childhood years, but when they get to maybe adolescent years, you'll find that maybe the child is closer to the other parent. And the dynamic between the parents also plays a role. Parents need to be on the same page, because the minute a child knows that they can manipulate or bargain or negotiate too much, challenges can also possibly arise in that space. So that, again, I love to use the word conscious parenting and really just being on the same page in terms of just the basic values. I think it links to values and the way you want to experience the atmosphere in the home. We're doing life with such struggle, and we need to work towards doing life with ease. So ask yourself, when am I experiencing life as easy? What aspect of my life, what aspect in my relationship with my child, with my teenager feels easy? And what aspect feels like a struggle? It's a good question just to pause and ask yourself. That'll give you a lot of answers about yourself as well. The child is a beautiful individual that comes into the world. I love Khalil Gibran's quote on how on children. I think it's they come through us, but we need to allow them the space to be the individuals and offer that experience of freedom. But sometimes we become so enmeshed in how we want our kids to behave. And we would all be very comfortable if everybody behaved the way we would like them to behave and according to our rules and our expectations. But think about how we repeat a pattern of that lack of freedom of actually just being. So we find ourselves in cycles of just an imprisonment in our being.
I would also like to ask the stress and present trauma. The words that we used in the last episode. The present trauma of exams, of how we look, and for the ones who are going to graduate soon, about jobs.
So I think when we look at the pressure of young teenagers, I can extend it to even young kids, adults. There's a similarity that I see is we tend to compare and compete with each other, and there's judgment, jealousy, all of those kind of aspects come into play, which adds to the level of stress and our standards of ourselves. That experience of I'm not good enough, or that person's better than me, or I'm weaker than that person. It's a cause for great concern, because so many of us are in that mode of comparison. And, when we think about other people, when we compare ourselves to others, very often we don't think of others as greater than. We look at ourselves and think more negatively, and we think that we are inferior. But perhaps if we could think of everyone as equal, wonder what life would be like, But it starts right from the beginning. Our education systems really train us to be comparative and competitive. The child that comes first in the class, and then you have the child that comes second in the class. No matter what, that child that comes second is going to feel, I'm not the first, that there's someone better than me. So it starts there, where we start pushing ourselves and driving ourselves and feeling like we need to do more and more and more and more. And again, I'll emphasize on the word do. Do. We are missing out on just pausing and just being and having fun. And it's the simple pleasures of life. I remember a young child coming to see me once, and I'll never forget this, because I think the child must have been about 6 or 7. And as the child sat down on the couch, they said, "Oh, I'm stressed." And that was the first word that came out of this young child's mouth. And then we did our session, and the minute I met the parent, the mom sat down on the couch and said the exact same words. I'm stressed, almost like a copy paste. And that spoke volumes to me, because it was the language again that was being used in the home. The atmosphere of the home was obviously tense, and of course we're living highly pressured life. We're struggling with our life-work balance, trying to find moments of rest, of things that we enjoy. I think that we need to really look at what we are really doing with our life. That's an important question to ask yourself. What am I doing with my life? And really look deeply into that question. And I don't think it's like a question, find the answer. It's an ongoing process, because as I say, we're changing, we're growing, and we need to meet ourselves in the version of who we are on that particular day. But for parents, I think the one message that I want to say to parents, whether it's a young child, whether it's a teenager, I think we're doing the very best that we can each day. And that very best is different each day. And we just need to honor our ability to do that best, and honor ourselves in, one day we may feel that we've really messed up, and the next day would be different. But watch very carefully how you judge yourself. What words are you saying to yourself? Because we speak very, very unkindly to ourselves in our minds. As parents, we're very hard on ourselves. When we have a child, I think what comes with that is a sense of guilt. And when we look at guilt, before we can even look at guilt, we need to look at the experience of fear. I think many parents, we need to look at and ask ourselves, are we raising kids with so much fear? Or what if my child doesn't get the ideal job? Or what if my child doesn't pass? Or how will my child be seen if their hair is too long? Or something as simple as that. Because I think that so many parents are so focused on what would other people think of them in raising their child if a child experiences failure in any way. But we need to look at those thoughts, and look at fear, look at shame, and look at guilt. I think it's the top three emotions that we need to delve in quite deeply in as human beings, whether it's about parenting or whether it's about any other form of relationship. But this, we can either parent from a place of love, or we can parent from a place of fear. And we need to make the choice which one we're going to choose.
And the advice for the teenagers you have?
Yeah, I think children can reach out and speak to an individual that they feel most comfortable. So ask yourself, who do I feel comfortable speaking to? And it could be your grade 1 teacher, if that's the person that you feel completely comfortable with, where there's an emotional resonance. We need to feel comfortable to speak to whoever we need to engage with. Seek the help. I think a lot of teenagers rely on their friendship peer groups for help and support. So choose wisely who your friends are, who your network is, because friends and your sense of who you connect with plays a very important role in how you perceive things, how you relate to things. I find that in that stage of teenagers struggle with peer relationships quite a bit, and they're so highly influenced at that stage in their life. And it's an important learning curve, but have someone that you can just sort of bounce off ideas with, talk to. There's so much resources available online. Delve into those resources, because I think sometimes, there's also just less emphasis or need to engage in that conversation. Sometimes it comes up a little bit too late when they when they need to seek help. So the sooner the better. So if you're a teenager, if you know of a family member or someone that your teenager really, really strikes a good connection with, nurture that relationship, and even ask that person, would it be okay that my teenager connects with you if ever there's something that they want to speak about? And then encourage your teenager to reach out to that person. Have a conversation and say to them, if you are ever feeling unsettled or unhappy or down, if you even look at one hand, in your hand there's 5 fingers. Who are the 5 people that you feel that you can reach out? Because your child needs to feel completely safe to be able to reach out. And so often when I ask teenagers to name me 5 people that they can call and they can rely on wholeheartedly, most of them don't even get past 1 or 2. And they really pause and think about it. And very rarely do they often say, my parents. So that speaks volumes. Your caregiver, you need to let your child know that no matter what, they can reach out to you. And you'll be on that other side to nurture them and to work through whatever challenge together. That's very important. That message must be there all the time. But I think at some point we need to also speak about the experience of failure. I think parents sometimes are hard on themselves, and in terms of how they judge their parenting style or the way they parent. I think so often when I speak to parents feel that they have failed their child in some way, and that adds to that pressure and that stress. If you think about the word stress, that comes up so often in our lives. And, if you think about the word children, just the word children or teenagers, we can feel it, teenagers. We have our theories and thoughts about teenagers. But the minute you put the word my teenagers, it changes. If you feel it, take a moment to feel that. Just use the word alone, teenagers. And then you put the word my teenager, it feels different. There's such a huge sense of responsibility, sometimes an experience of guilt, expectation, and that is where the beginning of stress comes in, and we need to just become a bit more curious about this word stress and how we even communicate it or display it in our homes.
Right, so if anyone wants to ask Asha any more questions, the link is in the description below. Asha, thank you so much for your time, as always, and I will see you next week.
Pleasure.